In this segment, I'm going to take a look at the tools on the editing toolbar, and that's found over here on the left-hand side of your workspace. Now I'm going to show each one of these tools, but I think what I'll do is just highlight what they all are to begin. So we have the Transform tool, we've got Edit Nodes, we've got Edit Stitches, we've got Split Objects, Zoom In, Modify Density, Modify Satin Width, Filter, and Reverse. So I'll go through and talk about each one of these, and we can start at the top with the Transform tool. And we've used this tool throughout the video, but I think I'd like to take an in-depth look at using the Transform tool. And so we'll go ahead and we'll start by just selecting an object. So easiest way to select an object is just to click on one. And when I have the Transform tool selected and I choose an object, I could move that object by simply clicking and dragging to change the location of an object. Another option that you have when using the Transform tool is to change the size of the object, and to do that I can use the corner handles of this object, and you'll notice when I get over top of the corner handles my mouse becomes a little set of arrows that go either in or out. And so for example, if I click and drag, I can make this object smaller. Now, something that's worth mentioning at this point is, because I'm working on a stitch file, this was a Jeff design that I'd previously digitized and simply opened up in Wings Modular, and because this is a stitch design, Wings Modular will not automatically change the density. In other words, if I resize an object of stitches, it'll have all the same number of stitches, they'll just be smaller and therefore more dense. So it's worth noting at this point, something I've previously shown in the video, which is under the Stitches drop-down menu, we have that Auto Density option. And if I apply that, you'll see right away that this object, maybe I'll do undo and I'll just go even closer. So when I choose Stitches and Auto Density and apply that, it adjusts the density to reflect the new size of the object that I'd made. Now, continuing looking at sort of changing the sizes of an object, I used the corner handle, and that basically changes the size of my object in proportion. But if I use a side handle, I can stretch my object or squish my object, so that'll change the proportions. Now, both the corner handles and the side handles have a secondary function, and you can see this. Maybe what I'll do is zoom in really closely over top of this corner handle. So let's see if I can get a little bit more centered so that it's, when I go right up to that corner, if I go right over the center of the white dot, I get the resize handle. But if I mouse a little bit beyond that corner, I get the rotation handle. And so now you can see my mouse becomes an arrow that's going in a circle, and it kind of highlights the whole corner. And that's basically how you can rotate your design. Now, if I zoom out, it'll be easier to see this. So for example, if I go to the corner, notice there's the size handles. If I just move a little bit further, I get the rotation handle, and now I can rotate this object to be any specific angle that I want it to be. And the other thing is on the side handles, so looking at the side handles, when I go to the center of that, I get the stretch options. But if I go just a little bit higher, I get a slant or a skew option. In other words, the ability to change the slant of the embroidery. So just zoom out so you can see that better. Go to the center, it's the stretch. Go a little bit further, I get that slant option to my embroidery object. So there's three or four different ways that you can modify the shape of an object by using the corner handles to give yourself a proportional size change, by the center handles to give yourself a stretch or squish size change, to rotate your design on the corner handles. And another thing about rotating is right now it's rotating right around the center. But I can move that rotation point. It's found right here, and when I mouse over that, you can see that my mouse changes again into, I guess, a multi-directional arrow. And for example, if I move that rotation point to, let's say, down here, Now if I went to rotate this design, it would rotate around that rotation point. So I was able to set the rotation point by simply clicking it and dragging it to be wherever I would like it to be. And then when I rotate, it rotates around that point. So that's transforming an object that's made out of stitches. Why don't we take a look? We'll use the window drop-down menu to switch over to the design of the star, which I'd also been working on in the process of this video. And we'll select the body of that star and show the same idea. I get the handles. I can change the size of this star. We'll make it a little bit bigger. And now this is something that's interesting and worth talking about. What happened here is it tells me that stitch editing has been done on this object, and so it's locked. And it's asking me if I want to regenerate the stitches, I'm going to lose those stitch edits. So whatever I may have done previously in the video, I must have been looking at using the stitch editing option, which we'll be taking a look at shortly. And whatever change I made, if I make this new size change, I'm going to lose those small stitch edits that I'd made. So it's warning me. It's really great that the software can catch that and warn you about this. So I'm going to say yes, because I don't care if it loses those stitch edits. And so it goes ahead and makes that change. So that's one thing that if you do make some stitch edits to a design that and then try and transform them later, that you'll be warned about it. Now, so that's the transform tool. Directly below that we have the edit nodes tool, and editing nodes specifically relates to vectorized designs. In other words, this doesn't work when you're working on the stitch designs like the butterfly. But for example, this is a design that I made using the Creative Drawing software and brought it over into the Wings modular. And so this is known as a stitch-based design. And if I go ahead now and choose Edit Nodes, what happens is all of the actual punch points that were used to create this star become available to me. And so, for example, I could move a node and therefore change the shape of the embroidery. And I can also insert a node just on the line by simply mousing over the line and clicking to insert a new node, and then I can drag to get that node to have that shape I want. So you can add new nodes to your embroidery designs, and you can select the existing ones and move them to new locations. Now you'll notice here that I have vector handles that allows me to help with the shaping of this. So when I added this new node in the center, that new node came in as a curve, and therefore it has shape handles which I can use to help adjust the shape of that line. So another thing I can do when I'm talking about editing nodes is this piece of weave fill is stitched on, this is the stitch direction. So the big pink highlight that comes across the center of it is the stitch angle, and I can actually select that and move that. And notice when I change the stitch angle that the stitches of the design get changed to the new stitch angle, so that you have the ability to change the stitch angle or move the nodes. And similarly, if I click on the blue outline, a different object, actually I need to first choose the transform tool, then I can select a different object, and then we can go back to editing nodes, and that would give me the ability to edit the nodes of this satin stitch border that we had created. So that's the same concept. You can move the nodes, you can add new nodes, and each time you do, you're changing the shape of the design that you made. So you'll notice if I pop back over to the butterfly and then try and select an object, so I'll choose this object here and then choose the edit nodes option, that I don't get nodes to edit. And that's because these are stitches and they're not vectorized objects, and therefore they don't have any nodes. So that's the second option on the toolbar. And then the next option is going to be edit stitches. And when I choose edit stitches, instead of editing objects based on transformations to size and whatnot, we actually can go in and edit the actual stitches. And so you'll notice when you go to edit stitches that, for example, when I mouse over a stitch, that stitch becomes selected. And this is also a time when maybe having the stitch marks turned on can be helpful, and maybe we'll turn that 3D view off so we can see all our stitch marks easily, and basically you can just click on a stitch to select it. Now, once you have a stitch selected, you could, for example, click and drag to move that stitch to a new location. We could select on the stitch and hit delete to delete that stitch altogether. We could right click on the stitch and choose to insert a new stitch. So basically I just added a stitch in between, and I can just keep adding stitches until I right click and it finishes doing that. So I'm going to do that again. I'll select a stitch, then I'm going to right click over top of that stitch and it gives me a secondary menu. And in this case I'm going to say insert. And you can see that it gives me the ability to insert a new stitch. And it remains turned on, so I could add as many new stitches as I wanted to. And as I add my new stitches, you can do whatever you want to your new stitches. So I'll try and draw a little registered trademark or something like that. So you can see the idea that of inserting individual stitches into the design. And again, to finish using this insert stitches, I right click, and that lets go of making that inserting stitches. So that's stitch editing, and editing the stitches is very different than the transformations, where with the transformations we simply change the size of the entire object. So okay, that's the first three generalized options under this toolbar. Now we could take a look at, for example, split objects. And this one can be helpful. So for example, where's a good example? Maybe I'll move out, try and zoom out and zoom in over here. So let's take a look at this object. I guess we'll choose transform and I'll select an object. So you can see that this is clearly one object. Now it's possible for me to break this into two objects, and the way I would do that is I would use the split objects tool. And to use the split objects tool, when I turn it on, I get this little knife, and I click once, drag across the stitches, and I click a second time, and that's it. I'm done using it now. And if I go back to the transform tool and select this, you'll see that now we have this object and this object. Oops, I'm going to select it. So basically, when I did that little slice, it actually split the embroidery into all the different objects. So it wasn't just two objects, it split it into this. It split everything right across the line. So that included splitting the underlay in half into two objects, and then the actual stitching on top into two objects. So it's your ability to take something that's all one and break it into two. And so maybe I can do that again. I'll select another object, just move it down here, and if I take a good close look, for example, where I want to split this, there would be the edge run underlay and the satin stitches at the top. And if I choose split object and split it right across there, so there, we're done using that tool. Now when I zoom out and take a look at that embroidery, if I choose transform, I have this object. So that was part of the run stitch that was walking out. I have this object, I have this object, and I have this underlay object. So it actually splits it into four, and that can be really helpful when you're trying to make design edits and you want to break something apart and just take something. Maybe there's a bird on a branch and you just want to get the bird, but you don't want the branch, and you need to cut something open to be able to do that. So that's called split objects. Now the next tool is called zoom in, and basically when you turn this on, you click and drag a box, and whatever you highlight, that's what it zooms into. So you turn it on, drag a box, that's what you zoom in. And I also use, like I've said before, I have my mouse set up with the scroll wheel for zooming out and zooming in. So that's a different way of doing it. But this way, you get to specifically draw a box that specifically says where you want to zoom into. And it'll zoom in just to that box that you'd made. So looking at the remaining tools here, these all have to do, again, a lot of the tools that are found in here are about editing stitches and editing stitch-based designs. And so, for example, the next object is called Modify Density. And so this will change the density of the selected objects. And perhaps, well, first of all, I'll just do this one. So we'll select an object, and then I'll choose Modify Density. And you'll see what I get here. It's a slider. I can choose to have less density or more density, and I'll take it down. So let's just reduce the density by about, 40%, and I'll say OK. And you can see quite clearly, I'll just use undo, that's what it looked like, and then when I adjusted the density, it reduced it. So that's really a great tool. If you could imagine you have a design, this doesn't just have to be on one object. For example, I could, and I realize this design's gotten quite busted apart into bunches. Why don't I just close it? Don't save my changes, and say open, and then reopen the design. So basically it's unmodified. This is the original design. And why don't I use the select all tool and then go modify density. And I could say, you know what, this design feels like it has too much density. I just like to reduce it by 10%, and so I choose 10% and say OK. And just to take note, it's got 28,570 stitches when I say OK. Now the design has 26,556 stitches. So it modified the entire design based on 10% less stitches. So that's an awesome tool that you can use for working with existing designs. Now the next one, modify satin width. Let's take a look at that. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in here on this piece of embroidery and select this object. So I've selected these stitches here, and when I choose modify satin width, again I get a little bit of a slider, and basically it says change the satin width, and it's either more or less. So for example, if I wanted to make these satin stitches fatter, I could take it to be more, and it's a specific number. So why don't I say to make it 1 millimeter fatter? And then the direction of the growth or shrinking, do I want it to go from the center out or the center in? So basically, it's just a different way, how it will apply the change. I'll just go ahead and apply the change so you can see what it looks like first off. So I'll say OK. And you'll notice everything that I'd selected there became quite a bit fatter. I'll just use undo to show you the change. So undo. That's what it originally was, and when I made everything 1 millimeter fatter, it just fattened it up. So why don't we do that again, and this time I'll take a look at so we're going to go 1 millimeter fatter, and we'll just change the direction. So basically, see, there's the original underlay. And so we change the direction towards the outside versus the inside. And that's when you say the direction, that's what it's talking about. So when I said from the center, it would have done it on a more sort of balanced, even on each side of the underlay. And that's what the difference is when you use this direction of growth from the center and in or out. So now the next tool we have is called filter, and this will filter out stitches. So why don't I guess we could take a look and see what it looks like. So I'm just going to choose the filter, and basically here I'll say undo. That happened pretty quickly. So here's my stitching. When I run the filter, it smooths everything. So right here, filter. And it basically takes all the stitches and just smooths them out so that they're nicely placed along a more smooth line. You'll really notice this, for example. Why don't I come over here, and I'll actually purposely stitch edit part of this design. So we'll zoom in on here, and I'll just move out, 1 or 2 of those stitches. So like this. So see how they're not smooth anymore. There's some sort of bit of unneeded raggedness to those stitches. When I choose that filter, it smooths them out. So that's what the filter tool does, is it just smooths out the stitches. Now we have one more tool on this toolbar, and it's a little bit difficult. I'm just trying to think of the best way to show using it. Why don't I do this? I selected all of the objects in this bottom scroll, and I'm going to choose the invert selection tool, and I'm going to choose the cut tool. So basically I've just deleted everything in the design but this lower scroll. Now before I show how the reverse works, I'm just going to show the slow redraw so that we can see how it sews. So it started here and it's going to this in this direction. So it's the direction of the stitching that I wanted you to see, because reverse is going to make this sew in the exact opposite sewing order. So for example, this one started here, and I guess when we get to the end we'll see where it finishes sewing. Well, it's going to finish sewing probably right back where it started from, isn't it? Nevertheless, you'll be able to see the reverse in the sewing order. So it started here and it came out and did all these pieces, then these pieces, then these pieces, and it's going to come back and finish in a moment right back down here. And it's almost done. Okay, so now I've still got a bit more to do. Now it's finished. Oh, whatever. Stop. Okay, so that's where it finishes. Stop. Close this. Select this. I'll select all of these objects. So I'll go select all, and we're going to choose this reverse. Now, if I was to do the slow redraw, you would see, and I'll just have to turn that back on. Slow redraw, start. It started sewing at the opposite end, and it's doing everything in the reverse order that it originally started in. So basically, it's changed the sewing order, and therefore, I guess because there was multiple objects, it changed the sewing order of each object one at a time. And so those stitches end up having a few jumps, but this could be really helpful. For example, if you were duplicating a design that you had made and you wanted to use copy, paste, and then mirror image it and have two of the exact same design, and you wanted to sort of flip them so that the second one sewed in the opposite sewing order, then that would be an example of why you could use it. So it's called reverse, and it basically will take the object that you have and we'll make it sew in the opposite sewing order that it originally started in. So yeah, that's a review of all of the tools found on the editing toolbar in the Wings modular software.